When my younger brother Marcus informed me that our family's 50-year-old guitar company had gone bankrupt, I nodded, offered him my condolences, and went back to my workshop. He believed he had erased my life's work with a simple, plausible lie. He saw a tired old man, a relic who would just fade away into a quiet retirement. He had no idea that the same hands that could shape a block of wood into a masterpiece could also shape a trap, and I was about to build him a beautiful, resonant coffin out of his own greed. Before I explain the full extent of his deception, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments if you think it is ever wise to mix family and business. My name is Elias Corbin, but everyone in Nashville just calls me Eli. At 75 years old, my world is my workshop, a quiet, dusty sanctuary behind my small home. The air in here is a perfume of rosewood, spruce, and lacquer, a scent I have breathed in for over half a century. The walls are lined with tools that are extensions of my own hands, chisels worn smooth by my grip, and saws that know my rhythm. This is where I practice the art of luthiery, the craft of making guitars. For 50 years, I was the heart of Corbin Guitars, a name that musicians spoke with a certain kind of reverence. Each instrument was a piece of me, a marriage of physics and soul that took hundreds of hours to create. My life has been a quiet one, defined by the patient work of my hands. My daily routine, even in retirement, begins here. I wait before the sun, make a simple cup of black coffee, and come to my bench. I do not have deadlines anymore, so I work on personal projects, experimenting with new bracing patterns or restoring old, forgotten instruments for friends. There is a deep peace in the slow, deliberate process, in feeling the wood grain under my fingertips, in knowing exactly how much pressure to apply to bend aside without breaking it. My brother, Marcus, who is younger than me by 7 years, was always the other half of our business. If I was the heart, he was the mouth. Marcus was the salesman, the deal maker, the one who handled the books and the contracts. He wore sharp suits, had a handshake that felt both firm and slippery, and spoke a language of profit margins and market expansion that I never fully understood. I was content with that arrangement. I wanted to build the best guitars in the world. He wanted to sell them. For decades, it seemed to work. The subtle hints of his true nature were there, if I had been willing to see them. He would walk through the workshop, not with the wonder of a craftsman, but with the eye of an auctioneer. He would tap on a stack of Brazilian rosewood that I had been aging for 30 years and say, "You know what this is worth per board foot, Eli? We are sitting on a gold mine." I would try to explain that its value was not in the price, but in the sound it would one day produce. He would just smile and pat my shoulder, a gesture that always felt more like a dismissal than an agreement. Looking back, the biggest red flag was the power of attorney. About 10 years ago, Marcus came to me with a stack of papers. He explained that as he was making bigger deals, trying to get our guitars into international markets, he needed the ability to sign contracts on behalf of the partnership without having to track me down in the workshop every time. "It is just a formality, Eli," he had said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "It is for business efficiency." I was in the middle of carving a particularly complex neck joint. I trusted him. He was my brother. I signed the document without reading it too closely, a mistake that would cost me everything. When I decided to retire last year, I left the business in his hands, believing he would protect it. I believed he understood that Corbin Guitars was more than a company. It was a legacy. It was a promise to the half-dozen loyal employees who had worked with us for decades. It was a testament to our family name. The call came 6 months after my retirement party. Marcus's voice was heavy with fake sympathy. He told me the market had shifted, that our handmade instruments could not compete with the cheap, mass-produced guitars from overseas. He said he had fought to keep the company afloat, but a few bad deals had sunk them. He declared bankruptcy. He told me everything was gone, the patents for my designs, the workshop, the brand name, and our entire stock of priceless aged wood. All of it, he said, had been seized by creditors to pay off the company's debts. I listened to his performance, and a cold, quiet certainty settled over me. It was all a lie. He had not lost the company. He had sold it. He had taken my trust, my life's work, and my name, and he had liquidated them for cash, leaving me and our loyal workers with nothing but his empty apologies. After the phone call with Marcus ended, I sat on my workshop stool for a long time, the scent of cedar shavings sharp in the air. The silence was absolute. My brother's words, a carefully constructed fiction of market forces and bad luck, echoed in the quiet space. He had always been a gifted storyteller, able to weave a narrative that made his own actions seem not only reasonable, but necessary. As a boy, he could talk his way out of any trouble, leaving me to take the blame for a broken window or a failed chore. I had seen it as a charming flaw then, a part of his slick, easygoing nature. Now I saw it for what it was, a tool he had honed for 60 years, and he had just used it to gut my life. My first instinct was not to call him back and scream. It was to seek proof. A luthier works with tangible things, with precise measurements and the immutable laws of physics. My gut feeling was a certainty, but I needed the cold, hard facts to build a case, just as I would need properly aged wood to build a guitar. I started by calling Frank Miller, our shop foreman for over 30 years. Frank was a craftsman in his own right, a man whose hands understood the language of wood as well as mine did. He was also fiercely loyal to the company, to the idea of what Corbin Guitars represented. I found him at home, his voice sounding hollow and lost. He told me Marcus had gathered the 6 of them in the finishing room the day before, his face a mask of sorrow. He had spun the same story of bankruptcy, telling them how he had fought tooth and nail, but that the big corporations had finally won. He gave them each a small severance check and told them the locks would be changed by the end of the day. Frank was devastated. "I just do not understand it, Eli," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We had orders backed up for a year. The demand was higher than ever. How could we be bankrupt?" He had just given me my first piece of concrete evidence. A company with a year-long waiting list for its products does not simply go bankrupt. I asked Frank if anything had been unusual in the weeks leading up to the closure. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Now that you mention it," he said slowly, "Marcus brought some men through the shop about a month ago. Men in expensive suits, not musicians. They did not touch anything. They just looked, while Marcus talked and pointed. He told us they were potential investors. He remembered overhearing a name, a corporation. Omnisound, he said, or something like that. They are a huge company, one of the big ones that buys up smaller brands. With that name, Omnisound, I had a thread to pull. After hanging up with Frank, I went to my study and sat down at the computer. I am not a man of the digital age, but I know how to search. I typed Omnisound and Corbin Guitars into the search bar. The results were immediate and sickening. There, on a corporate acquisitions news site, was a press release dated 2 weeks prior. Omnisound Global acquires esteemed artisan brand, Corbin Guitars. The article was filled with corporate jargon about synergies and brand integration. It detailed the acquisition of all company assets, including the brand name, the workshop, all existing inventory, and most painfully, a portfolio of innovative design patents and a legendary stock of aged tonewoods. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a documented business transaction. Marcus had not just sold the company, he had sold my name, my ideas, and the precious wood I had spent a lifetime collecting and curing. The article did not list a sale price, but I knew where to look for that. Corporate acquisitions of this size often have to be filed publicly. I navigated through a series of investor relations pages and business registries. It took me another hour of patient searching, but I finally found it, buried in a quarterly financial disclosure from Omnisound. The sale price was listed in cold, black and white print, $3,750,000. The number seemed to float off the screen. I thought of the small severance checks Marcus had given to Frank and the others. I thought of his performance of the grieving businessman, a victim of the modern economy. He had not been grieving. He had been celebrating a multi-million-dollar windfall. I leaned back in my chair, the study feeling cold despite the afternoon sun. I now understood the full scope of his deception. He had used my trust, the power of attorney I had foolishly signed, and my retirement as the perfect cover to execute his plan. He had waited until I was out of the way, then he had dismantled my life's work and sold it for parts like a common thief. The brother I thought I had, the man who had stood beside me for 50 years, did not exist. He had been replaced by a stranger, a man who would sell his family's legacy for a pile of cash. The emotional tension in my chest was not hot anger. It was a cold, hardening pressure. I was not dealing with a failed businessman. I was dealing with a predator. The immediate consequence of discovering the $3.7-5 million sale was a profound and unsettling quiet in my soul. The anger I expected did not come, nor did the crushing grief. Instead, I felt a deep, hollow emptiness, the kind of silence that follows a devastating impact. For 2 days, I did nothing. I sat in my workshop, the tools hanging silent on the walls, and stared at a half-finished guitar on my bench. Its spruce top was perfectly joined, the bracing meticulously carved, but it felt like an artifact from another man's life. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made, every drop of sweat and passion I had poured into my craft had been reduced to a line item in a corporate financial report. The betrayal was absolute. It was not just the theft of money. It was the erasure of meaning. Corbin Guitars was meant to be a legacy, a living thing that would continue to create beauty long after I was gone. Marcus had turned it into a ghost, a brand name to be stamped onto soulless factory-made instruments overseas. He had not just sold our company. He had sold our story, our name, and the future of the loyal men who had helped us build it. I thought of Frank Miller, who had likely put his small severance check toward his mortgage, believing my brother's lies. I thought of the other employees, men in their 50s and 60s with specialized skills that were not easily transferred to other jobs. Marcus had not just left them unemployed, he had left them betrayed, their decades of loyalty dismissed as a business expense. My relationship with Marcus, which I had believed to be the bedrock of my life, was revealed as a 50-year lie. Every shared memory was now tainted. Every family dinner, every holiday, every word of encouragement he had ever given me was now cast in the shadow of this ultimate deception. Had he been planning this for years? Had his envy of my talent and the respect I commanded in our field been festering all this time? I realized that to him, I was not his partner. I was his primary asset, and he had finally cashed me in. The turning point came on the 3rd day. I was sanding a piece of scrap mahogany, the repetitive motion a familiar comfort. As my hand moved with the grain of the wood, a lifetime of discipline and focus took over. A luthier does not solve a problem with brute force. He solves it with patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of the material he is working with. I looked at my brother not as a family member, but as a piece of flawed material. His grain was twisted, his structure compromised by a fatal knot of greed. You cannot fix a flaw like that, but you can use it. You can exploit its weakness until the entire structure collapses under its own weight. It was in that moment, with the fine mahogany dust settling in the morning light, that the hollowness inside me began to fill with a cold, clear purpose. I would not sue him. A lawsuit would be a battle of lawyers and money, a world he was far more comfortable in than I. It would take years and would only result in a financial settlement. That was not justice. Justice, I decided, was not about getting the money back. Justice was about making him understand, in a way he could never forget, the true value of what he had thrown away. I would build a trap for him. I would construct it with the same care and artistry that I put into my finest instruments. The bait would be perfectly crafted to appeal to his insatiable greed. The mechanism would be invisible, hidden within the fine print of a contract he would be too arrogant to scrutinize. And when the trap sprung, it would not just take his money, it would strip him of the one thing he craved more than wealth, his reputation as a savvy businessman. He had turned my art into a commodity. I would use his own soulless philosophy of business to orchestrate his ruin. I walked over to a special cabinet in the corner of my workshop, a place where I kept my most precious and rare materials. I unlocked it and pulled out a set of dark, beautifully figured Brazilian rosewood I had been saving for 40 years. It was irreplaceable, a relic from a bygone era of luthiery. I laid the pieces on my workbench. The project I had been saving them for was gone, but now they had a new purpose. They would be the foundation of my masterpiece of revenge. The first conscious decision I made was to embrace the role Marcus had assigned me. To the world, and more importantly to him, I had to be the heartbroken artist, the bewildered old man adrift without his life's work. I stopped answering my phone for a few weeks, letting the silence feed the narrative of my despair. When I finally did emerge, I made a point of visiting a few of the old music shops on Broadway, places where my name still carried weight. I would talk to the owners, my voice quiet and tinged with sadness, about the tragedy of the bankruptcy. The market just has no place for old-timers like me anymore, I would say with a sigh, knowing every word would eventually find its way back to my brother. Marcus needed to believe he had won completely, that I was a broken man incapable of suspicion or action. While I was playing the part of the defeated craftsman, I began the meticulous process of building my trap. I called my most gifted former apprentice, a young man named Ben Carter. Ben was in his late 30s, a brilliant luthier in his own right, who had left Corbin Guitars 5 years earlier to start his own successful custom shop. He was one of the few people I trusted implicitly, a man who revered the craft as much as I did. I invited him to my workshop, and over a bottle of aged bourbon, I laid out the entire story, showing him the press release and the financial filings. Ben's face hardened as he listened, his respect for me warring with his disgust for my brother. When I finished, he looked at me, his eyes blazing. "What do you need me to do, Eli?" he asked without a moment's hesitation. My plan was simple, and it was designed to prey on Marcus's two greatest weaknesses, his greed and his deep-seated envy of my talent. "We are going to start a rumor," I told Ben. "The rumor is that my retirement was a lie. The truth is, I stepped away from the company to focus all my energy on perfecting a secret project, the culmination of my life's work." I walked over to a locked cabinet and pulled out a small, intricately wired device. It was an old prototype for an acoustic guitar pickup I had tinkered with years ago. It had never worked properly, but it looked incredibly complex and impressive. "This," I said, placing it on the workbench, "is the Corbin resonance pickup. It is a revolutionary system that uses microtransducers to capture the vibrations of the wood itself, not just the strings. It produces a sound so pure it is indistinguishable from a studio microphone." Ben looked at the device, then back at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. He understood immediately. It was the ultimate fantasy for any acoustic musician, a true holy grail of sound technology. "It is completely fake, of course," I said, "but Marcus will not know that. All he will see are dollar signs." Our next step was to give the rumor a vessel. With Ben's help, we established a new empty shell corporation, EC Innovations. We hired a lawyer to draw up the papers and rented a small, cheap office space that we had no intention of ever using. We then built a simple but professional-looking website, complete with slick marketing copy about the future of acoustic sound. and high-resolution photos of my impressive-looking but worthless prototype. The final piece of the lure was the demonstration. I called in a favor from a well-known session musician in Nashville, a man for whom I had built a custom guitar 20 years ago. I explained the situation, and he agreed to help without a second thought. We spent a day in a recording studio. He played one of my finest guitars, recorded through the best microphones money could buy. Then Ben, who was also a skilled video editor, meticulously edited the footage. He created a seamless video that made it look as though the incredible studio quality sound was coming directly from the fake pickup attached to the guitar. The video was our masterpiece of deception. We did not release it widely. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Ben leaked it to a few influential musicians and sound engineers he knew, people whose social circles overlapped with my brother's. We were not advertising. We were planting a seed in the fertile ground of the Nashville gossip mill. The trap was now set. We had a fake company, a worthless prototype, a brilliant marketing video, and a carefully cultivated rumor. We were testing his weakness, dangling the one thing we knew he could not resist, a chance to profit one last time from my genius, to own the one masterpiece he thought I had been hiding from him. All we had to do now was wait for the fish to bite. Before we go on, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. The real game was just beginning, and I was not about to lose. The seed we planted in the Nashville music scene sprouted faster than I could have imagined. Within a week, the rumor about my secret project was the talk of the town. Ben told me he was getting calls from producers and musicians, all asking about the revolutionary Corbin resonance pickup. They were intrigued, excited, and most importantly, they were talking. My brother, Marcus, had always kept his ear firmly pressed to the ground of the local industry, and it did not take long for the gossip to reach him. The execution of the next phase of our plan was one of patient observation. I did nothing. I continued to play the role of the forgotten craftsman, making my quiet visits to the music shops and speaking sadly of the past. Ben, however, became the public face of EC Innovations. He fielded the inquiries, acting as the protective gatekeeper of my supposed genius. He would tell callers, "Eli is not ready to go public yet. He is a perfectionist. We are not taking any offers until the patent is fully secured, and we are ready for a global launch." This carefully orchestrated reluctance was designed to inflame Marcus's greed and fear of missing out. A known opportunity is one thing, but a secret, exclusive opportunity is irresistible to a man like him. The first sign that Marcus had taken the bait came through our lawyer. He received a formal inquiry from a consulting firm representing an anonymous investor who was extremely interested in the new pickup technology. The language was cautious and corporate, but the intent was clear. It was Marcus, hiding behind a layer of plausible deniability. We instructed our lawyer to respond politely but firmly. EC Innovations is not seeking outside investment at this time. We were turning the screw, making him believe this was a prize he would have to fight for. We encountered a minor setback when a legitimate audio engineering company, intrigued by the video, reached out with a serious inquiry about the technology. They wanted to see the technical specifications and test the prototype. For a moment, I felt a flicker of anxiety. Our deception could be exposed if the wrong people got too close. But Ben handled it perfectly. He informed them that we had signed a temporary exclusivity agreement with a private research firm and could not share the intellectual property, but we would keep them in mind for the future. The lie was plausible and professional, and it had the added benefit of making our fake company seem even more legitimate. Marcus's next move was more direct. He called me. It was the first time we had spoken in months. His tone was a masterful blend of feigned concern and casual curiosity. "Eli," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I have been hearing things around town. Something about a new pickup? I hope you are not getting taken for a ride by some new business partner. You know how these people can be." It was a transparent attempt to gather intelligence. He was probing, trying to gauge my awareness and confirm the rumors. I played my part, sounding tired and a little confused. "Oh, that," I said dismissively. "It is just a little something I have been tinkering on. Ben is helping me with the business side of things. It is all very complicated." "Well, just be careful," he said, the false sincerity thick in his voice. "I would hate to see you lose what little you have left." He was not just probing, he was condescending, secure in his belief that I was a foolish old artist who needed his protection. His arrogance was making him blind. The final escalation came a week later. The anonymous investor, through the consulting firm, made a formal, unsolicited offer to buy EC Innovations outright. The offer was for $1 million. It was a serious number, designed to be a knockout blow that would tempt a small, unknown startup. Ben and I met with our lawyer. "We reject it," I said, without hesitation, "and we instruct you to tell them that we have received a competing offer from a major, international firm and will no longer be entertaining unsolicited bids." This was the critical move. We were manufacturing a bidding war where the only bidder was Marcus himself. We were leveraging his deepest fear, the idea that someone else, a bigger, smarter corporation, was about to snatch up the golden goose he believed he was entitled to. We knew his greed, and his ego would not allow that to happen. He had stolen my first legacy for $3.75 million. Now he was about to spend a significant portion of that stolen fortune to buy a legacy that did not even exist. The trap was closing. The lie about a competing offer from an international firm worked on Marcus like a magnet on iron filings. His greed, amplified by his fear of being outmaneuvered, pushed him into a state of reckless urgency. The cautious, anonymous investor was gone, replaced by a desperate businessman who was terrified of losing the next big score. Less than 48 hours after we rejected his first offer, a new one came in, this time directly from Marcus's personal lawyer to ours. He was no longer hiding. The new offer was for $4 million. He was offering to pay more for my fake company than the corporation had paid for my real one. He was so blinded by the narrative we had crafted that he was willing to spend every last cent of his stolen fortune, and likely more, to acquire our worthless box of wires. The climax was no longer a matter of if, but when. We instructed our lawyer to accept the offer, but with one non-negotiable condition. Due to the sensitive and proprietary nature of the technology, the entire $4 million sum had to be transferred and held in an escrow account for a full 24 hours before the final signing. This would give our legal team time to complete the final patent transfer documents. It was a plausible-sounding legal formality, but its true purpose was to ensure that every penny of his liquid worth was secured in an account we controlled before he ever set foot in the signing room. His lawyer, likely sensing his client's frantic desire to close the deal, agreed to the terms without protest. The day of the signing was a crisp autumn morning. I chose to wear what I always wore, a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans. I was a luthier, and I would face him as one. Ben and I arrived at the downtown law office of our attorney, a sterile environment of glass walls and polished wood that felt a world away from my dusty workshop. We did not bring a prototype or any business documents. We brought only a single sealed manila envelope. We sat in the large conference room, the city of Nashville sprawling out below us, and waited. Marcus arrived precisely on time. He strode into the room brimming with a triumphant, predatory energy. He was wearing an expensive, tailored suit, and his smile was wide and self-satisfied. He did not look like a man who had bankrupted his own brother. He looked like a titan of industry who had just conquered a new territory. He gave me a condescending, almost pitying look. "Eli," he said, his voice magnanimous, "I am glad to see you are going to be taken care of. I told you I would always look out for you." He truly believed he was the hero of this story, swooping in to buy my little project and turn it into a global success. He sat down at the head of the long table, his lawyer beside him, and looked expectantly at my attorney. "Well," Marcus said, rubbing his hands together, "shall we sign the papers and make it official?" My lawyer, a calm, stoic woman named Miss Albright, slid a single piece of paper across the table to him. It was not a contract. It was a certified statement from the escrow company, confirming the receipt of his $4 million transfer. "The funds have been secured, Mr. Corbin," she said. "However, my client has a final presentation before we proceed." I stood up slowly and walked to the head of the table, placing the manila envelope in front of my brother. "Before you buy my company, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying the weight of 50 years of deception, "I think you should see the patent for the technology you are so eager to acquire." He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, and opened the envelope. He pulled out not a complex technical document, but a single sheet of paper. On it was a simple, hand-drawn diagram I had sketched that morning. It was a childlike drawing of a tin can with a string attached to it. Underneath, I had written in block letters, "The Corbin Resonance Pickup, Prototype 1. He stared at the drawing, his brain refusing to process what he was seeing. His confident smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. "What is this?" he stammered. "What kind of a joke is this?" "It is no joke," I said, my voice as cold and hard as aged maple. "That is the entirety of the intellectual property of EC Innovations. The company has no other assets. The pickup does not exist. The video was a fake. You have just transferred $4 million for a drawing of a tin can." The color drained from his face. His lawyer was shuffling through his own papers, his expression shifting from confusion to horrified realization. Marcus looked from the drawing to me, his eyes wide with the dawning of a catastrophic understanding. "You cannot do this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The money is in escrow. I will stop the transfer." "You cannot," Miss Albright interjected, her tone clinical. "The escrow agreement you signed gives my client full control of the funds upon the presentation of the agreed-upon intellectual property. You have been presented with the patent. The deal is complete. The victory was absolute." The critical moment was not loud. It was a devastating, silent implosion. In a quiet conference room, high above the city, my brother's entire world, a world built on stolen money and a lifetime of lies, had just been reduced to a child's drawing and an empty bank account. He had been so sure of his own genius, he never once stopped to consider mine. That is how I got my so sweet revenge. Marcus sat frozen in the conference room, his face a mask of disbelief. The swaggering CEO who had walked in minutes earlier had vanished, replaced by a hollowed-out old man. He looked at the drawing, then at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. For the first time in his life, the master salesman had nothing to say. He had been so thoroughly, so completely outmaneuvered that his mind could not grasp it. He had not just been beaten. He had been artistically dismantled. He did not shout or protest further. He simply stood up on unsteady legs, a man visibly aged by a decade in a single moment, and walked out of the room without looking back. That was the last time I ever saw my brother. The life after his downfall was not about gloating, it was about rebuilding. The $4 million, his entire stolen fortune, was now mine, but it never felt like my money. It was a corrupted sum that I had a moral obligation to cleanse. My lawyer, Miss Albright, helped me set up a trust. The first beneficiaries were the 6 loyal employees Marcus had cast aside. I calculated what their salaries and benefits would have been from the day the company was bankrupt until their rightful retirement age, and paid each of them that amount in a lump sum. I met with Frank Miller personally to give him his check. He sat in my kitchen, holding the paper, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew Marcus was lying. I just could not prove it. Thank you, Eli. You did not have to do this. This is not a gift, Frank, I told him. This is your money. You earned it. The rest of the fortune was used to create the Corbin Foundation for American Luthery. It is a grant program that provides funding for young, aspiring instrument makers, helping them buy tools, source quality wood, and set up their own workshops. It ensures that the craft, the real legacy of the Corbin name, will be nurtured and passed down to a new generation, a mission that is far more enduring than any corporate brand name. My name is no longer on the headstock of mass-produced guitars made by Omnisound. Instead, it is on a small plaque in the workshops of dozens of young artisans across the country who are keeping the soul of the craft alive. That is a legacy I am proud of. I found a deep and lasting peace, not in my brother's ruin, but in the quiet, constructive work of restoration. My days are once again filled with the familiar rhythm of my workshop. I still build guitars, not for profit, but for the sheer love of it. I build them for talented young musicians who cannot afford a quality instrument, and for old friends. Each one is a small act of defiance against the world of mass production and corporate greed that Marcus embraced. Sometimes I hear whispers about him. He lost his big house in the city and lives a quiet, solitary life somewhere out in the county. He is a man with no reputation, no fortune, and no family. He is a ghost, haunted by the memory of a deal that was too good to be true. My revenge was not a single fiery moment of confrontation. It was a slow, patient, and perfectly executed piece of craftsmanship. I took a flawed material, my brother's greed, and used its inherent weakness to create something of lasting value. He sought to turn my art into money. I turned his money back into art, and in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me what part of the story you liked most.